Hello, I am the Noetherian, and this is the second video in a series of 6 videos where I show off each of the 6 faction combinations in the new Soulforge draft mode. So here we are at Pack 1, Pick 1. I'd like to start off by showing you Steelforged Avatar. Probably some of you are familiar with Steelforged Avatar. It's quite a strong card in Constructed. The avatars in draft, I think, pose an interesting question. In order for the avatars to be good, you need to draft an almost mono-faction deck, probably at least like 80% the faction that matches your avatar. In order to get good use out of the avatar, have it be better than an average creature. And the problem with drafting an almost monocolor deck is that it means that in some situations you're going to pass up a slightly stronger card in order to take a card that matches the avatar's color and make your avatar stronger, keep your deck at like 80% of the avatar's faction. Now, whether or not that's a good strategy, I think depends a lot on how available the Shapers are. The Shaper Savants have been changed so that they now are another card that rewards you for playing a deck that's heavily one faction. So if the Shaper Savants end up not being very popular, and you end up seeing Shaper Savants fall late in packs because people aren't taking them, then I think it makes the avatar strategy, the 80% one faction strategy, quite viable. On the other hand, if the Shaper Savants are quite popular, if lots of people are taking the Shaper Savants, even in decks that are half one faction, half another, if the Shaper Savants are still useful to people in those 50-50 decks, then it's going to be harder to grab Shaper Savants later in the draft, and probably the avatar strategy, the 80% one faction strategy, is not going to turn out to work very well. So ultimately, I can't predict the future. We're going to have to see exactly how that shapes up. But for the time being, I'm avoiding first picking any of the avatars. So Lifeblood Dryad is a strong first pick, I believe. And in particular, it goes very, very well in the type of Utera plus Nekrium deck that I drafted in my previous draft video. That being said, I think the strongest card in this set is Scrapforge Titan. Scrapforge Titan is the largest heroic bomb in the game. Now, the thing that you need to keep in mind when you're drafting around a Scrapforge Titan is you need to make sure that you don't get run over early. It's very easy to draft a deck with lots of Technosmiths and Metasites. You play your Scrapforge Titan, you play small bodies early game, and you get completely run over by something like an aggressive Tempest Utera deck. So I'm going to grab Scrapforge Titan. I think Scrapforge Titan tends to work best in Alloyin plus Nekrium decks. I think it's easiest to stall out, give yourself time to bring out the Titan if you take Nekrium as your second faction, but I'm open to other second factions depending on what the packs bring me. So let's lock in Scrapforge Titan. So first of all, I don't have the option here of putting off my decision by taking another Alloyin card, so I am going to need to take a second faction, either locking into Alloyin Tempest or Alloyin Nekrium. I think that none of these cards jump out at me as being particularly great in a Scrapforge Titan deck. On the other hand, as I said, all things being equal, I'd rather be stalling with Alloyin Nekrium than any other faction combination. So I'm going to take Alloyin Nekrium. I think I'm going to start out with Call the Weak. So Call the Weak, not a great removal card in draft. I'm not particularly happy to be second picking it. On the other hand, both Nekrium and Alloyin have a lot of ways of reducing a creature's attack. And so with something like the new Banshee or Hungering Strike, it's possible to get good use out of Call the Weak. Also, Call the Weak is great against those annoying creatures like Battle Tactician and General that can cause serious problems, and especially early game. So I'm going to try out the Call the Weak. So Not excited about any of these cards. I think the pick is pretty clearly Metamind Adept. I'm not a big fan of Metamind Adept in most draft decks. However, it will help us draw our Titan, which is good. And also, I need to get some bodies into this deck, and none of the other cards are particularly exciting in this archetype. Love heavy artillery in a more aggressive deck, but that's not what we're drafting here. Speaking of more aggressive decks, Light Shield Patrol is certainly a strong card in the right deck. I don't think it's a good card for this deck. Not particularly excited by Zithian Hulk, but I'm going to take it. And we have a late Touch of Blight and Rite of the Grimgaunt. So Rite of the Grimgaunt doesn't fit particularly well into this deck. Works a lot better in a Necria Utera deck that's playing a lot of seedlings or small creatures like Aetherhounds. But I will try out the Rite of the Grimgaunt because I think Touch of Blight is not going to be very helpful. So this is a difficult pick. I think the choices are Forge Plate Sentry, a very strong all-around creature, very good late game. I think to complement my Scrapforge Titan, I'd love to have a couple of other strong late game cards like a Forge Plate Sentry for those games when I don't draw my Scrapforge Titan. But I think I'm going to pick the Charnel Titan. Charnel Titan's one of the new cards. It enrages itself when it comes into play if your opponent has a low attack creature. So again, Nekrium and Alloyin both have ways of lowering a creature's attack. Spells like Ghastly Touch, Hungering Strike, Electronet. So I'm going to take Charnel Titan. I think Charnel Titan can be very useful to prevent my opponent from running me over early game, and also turns into a fairly strong late game monstrosity. And in particular, in this deck, I'm already wanting to pick debuffs that reduce my opponent's attack just to protect my health total. So, I mean, I'm already happy to draft something like an Electronet just as a stall card, and therefore I think Charnel Titan will fit in very well for this combination. So Zerath was completely reworked in this patch. It used to be that Zerath gave all of your zombies the Blightwalker ability. That is, anything your zombies killed, anything your zombies damaged was killed. Now Zerath has much better base stats, so he's actually a threat in his own right, and he gives all zombies, including himself, regenerate too. So I'm going to take Zerath. I don't have any other zombies right now, but Zerath is a large body. It's potentially a threat. Help me avoid getting run over early game. The only other thing I consider here is the Morrow Fiend, where having the 8 attack makes it a very good blocker, even at level 1. But I think I'm interested in Zerath. So with Zerath, I'm now going to take the, or at least consider taking the Graveghast. I think the choice here is between Vault Technician, which is a high power blocker. Every deck is going to want to have some level 1 creatures that, even if you don't play them during the first player rank, are still useful blockers mid to late game. So Vault Technician fills that role very well. His level 1 and his level 2 are very relevant even late in the game, and so he's not a card that you need to prioritize leveling. Graveghast, the level 1 Graveghast is very, very bad. On the other hand, there's a number of decks that have trouble dealing with the level 2 and level 3 Graveghasts. So Graveghast plus Zerath can be very scary for your opponents. Tempted to grab the Graveghast to go with my Zerath, but I think the Vault Technician is just a stronger pick here because I'm short on high attack creatures. Let's see. So I have some other zombies to choose from. Neither Fellwalker nor Rune-Scarred Zombie combo very well with Zerath because Zerath gives regeneration, and these are both zombies that typically die in one hit. Rune-Scarred Zombie is a great card if I'm playing a lot of spells. I don't know yet, actually, how many spells I'm going to end up playing. Also, note there's a Steel Shaper late in this deck, but I seem to be tilting more Nekrium and less Alloyin, and so I think I'm not willing to invest in a Steel Shaper. I think I'm going to grab the Fellwalker. It's a useful blocker. Oftentimes you can block with a Fellwalker, kill off an aggressive creature, and then... or a creature that is on the offensive, and then be left with a 3/3 body. So I will take the Fellwalker. Here I'm just going to take the Sparkbot for the body. So if I look at my deck now partway through, I've got a good mix of cards to put some bodies out early game, which I think is important for a deck that wants to win in the late game. Important to have some cards that will keep you alive early. I feel like I've got some cards in Charnel Titan and Zerath that are going to help me with that. Fellwalker is a great blocker. It can double block, protect my life total. I need to get at least one more late game threat to go with my Scrapforge Titan. Would love to get like a Technosmith in this deck, possibly a Metasite. And also, because I have the Charnel Titan, I love to get an Electronet, a Palladium Pulse Mage, some cards that will help me reduce my opponent's attack. But let's take the Sparkbot here and see what we're... Okay. So, this is difficult. Infiltrator is just a very good card. I'm never unhappy to have an Infiltrator in my deck. It works incredibly well in more aggressive decks, but it also fits in as a blocker in a stall deck like the one I envision. Electronet is a pretty quality stall card, can act as removal in many cases. Also, it powers the Charnel Titan. And Metasite would like to have a Metasite in my deck just as a way of leveling up cards like Scrapforge and hopefully some other threat eventually, like a Forge Plate Sentry, perhaps. So... I think I'm going to take the Electronet. I think it's possible that the Infiltrator is first pick. I hope to see either a Metasite or a Technosmith later on when they're not up against such good cards. But my removal situation is not very good right now, and if I'd like to survive long enough to win with Titan, I'm going to need some way to slow down opposing threats. And I'd love to pick up a second Charnel Titan. They're common, so I'm going to grab Electronet. Blightwalker is just an excellent stall card. Also, Blightwalker works very well with Zerath. Oftentimes, a Blightwalker will survive at low health, and the Zerath regeneration comes in very handy. So, very excited to take a Blightwalker here. Going to take a Graveborn Glutton as a blocker. Again, for the same reason that I like to have things like Vault Technician. Happy to have Graveborn Glutton. It's not going to be a card that I try to level up early game, but it's a good blocker mid to late game. Tower Vanguard is an interesting card. If you have multiple ways of granting armor, it can become a late game threat. I think I don't have any ways of granting armor. Probably I'm not going to have any ways of granting armor. This really isn't a good deck for a Tower Vanguard, but probably not for a Bulwark Bash either. The only armor creature I have is Scrapforge Titan. I'm going to grab the Vanguard, but I think it's a weak pick here. This is a tough call. So I think Gloom Reaper Witch is a underrated card in Draft. Oftentimes can get you a 2-for-1, especially, I mean, works very well with things like Hungering Strike or Palladium Pulse Mage, although I don't have either of those and we're halfway through the draft. So I'm going to take Death Seeker as a card that's capable of blocking twice. Flow Steel Prototype. Always exciting to get a legendary, but I'm going to have to pass it up this time because I think it is not going to end up being very useful in my deck. Instead, I'm going to take the Zombie Infantry. Zombie Infantry works very well with Zerath. Quality body. Deck is ending up being more aggressive than I originally envisioned because I'm not finding cards like Ionic War Charger or Forge Plate Sentry. I'm not finding late game threats to go with my Scrapforge Titan. Haven't seen a Technosmith yet, so I'm not sure exactly at what speed this deck is going to operate. The choice here is between Palladium Pulse Mage and Hungering Strike. Both of those cards are good cards for reducing my opponent's attack, triggering my Charnel Titan. Palladium Pulse Mage, if you haven't seen it, it got reworked in the last patch. It used to have a coming into play effect. Instead, now it has an activated ability that lowers attack, but only until end of turn. I think I'm going to take the Palladium Pulse Mage. I think, yeah, I think that's a good card for this deck. Would not mind having Hungering Strike, but we'll take the Pulse Mage. Tarthus Deathweaver, great card. Would have loved to have had a second one of those in my Utera Nekrium deck, but it doesn't work very well in this deck. Necroslime is interesting, but Necroslime tends not to be used. So it is good with regeneration. I have a little bit of regeneration in this deck, but not a lot. Necroslime is not very good if I get behind on the board, because Necroslime is the kind of card that you need to put into an empty lane. I do have one Fellwalker and one Deathseeker. This isn't a great deck for Tarthus Deathweaver, but Deathweaver has a good body attached to it. And so even though I'm not going to get good use out of the ability, I think it's probably going to end up being more useful than the Necroslime. I don't think this is going to be a good Necroslime deck. I think I like Necroslime in a little bit more aggressive decks, where I know that I'm not going to need to block with it. So, Darkheart Wanderer is an excellent card if my spell count is high. On the other hand, you see that I only have 3 spells in the deck right now, and so I think I'm not very excited about picking up a Darkheart Wanderer. I'm going to go with Scorpion. Solid body, I don't need to level it up, and yeah, solid body, don't need to level it up, and can be relevant mid to late game. So neither of these cards, I think, are very useful. The Forge Guardian Alpha is helpful in a stall situation, good for blocking opposing threats. The Aegis Pulse, I haven't been a big fan of Aegis Pulse, although I do have the Tower Vanguard in the deck. It's possible I could combo an Aegis Pulse off a Tower Vanguard. Also, some Aegis Pulse works really well with regeneration. Giving even 1 point of armor to his Wrath can sometimes make things very uncomfortable for my opponent. I'm not excited about either of these cards, but I'm going to try the Aegis Pulse. And there's the Forge Plate Sentry I've been wanting. So, if I want to be able to win games late, I need to have other strong late game cards besides my Scrapforge Titan, and Forge Plate Sentry certainly fits that bill. So I'm excited to have a Forge Plate. Corpse Crawler is also another card that can potentially win games. I don't have a lot of sacrifice fodder for my Corpse Crawler. And Corpse Crawler can be bad when I'm behind on the board. On the other hand, I do have the Titan to sacrifice early. I have a number of creatures with reasonable health who could end up sitting around at low health after combat, ready to be sacrificed to a Corpse Crawler. I think I'm going to take the Corpse Crawler here. I don't want too many of them in this deck because I don't have much sacrifice fodder, but I think I have just enough that I can get away with it. So we'll take Corpse Crawler. Given that I have a Pulse Mage in this deck and an Electronet, I at least consider taking a Gloom Reaper Witch here. My deck doesn't have a ton of ways to lower attack, but it has some. Gravegast can be good later in the game, as I said. Not sure what I think of the Gravegast. Force Field actually is easy to undervalue in draft. Sometimes if you have a difficult threat, you have something like a big Charnel Titan that you've managed to enrage, or a Scrapforge Titan or Forge Plate Sentry, and your opponent works really hard to create a blocker that can deal with it. Tossing out a Force Field in order to keep your threat alive for one more turn, force your opponent to scramble to deal with it, can be quite useful. I think it's also Force Field, of course, is capable of triggering for one turn the Tower Vanguard, which can be an unpleasant surprise for your opponent. Let's see, we're nearing the end of the draft. I'm probably not going to get many more ways to reduce a creature's attack. I guess I really only like the Witches if I have a little bit more minus attack than I ended up with. In particular, didn't end up with any of the new Banshees. Didn't end up with a Hungering Strike. I'm going to take a Force Field here. Take the Fellwalker. Fellwalker is both a reasonable blocker. Also, I do have the Tarsus Deathweaver in the deck, which helps. And I'm going to take Jetpack over Nexus Core, although this isn't a great Jetpack deck. Well, there's a Ghastly Touch. I said that I didn't end up with quite as much minus attack in this deck as I had perhaps hoped originally. I already have 2 Fellwalkers. I might have enough spells to make Runescarred Zombie decent, but not good against given the other options. I'm going to take one more spell, the Ghastly Touch. Nexus Pilot versus Warcharger is the choice here. I think Nexus Pilot is quite good early to mid-game. Being a 6/8 at level 1 and a 10/14 at level 2 is very, very strong. On the other hand, my pick here is Warcharger. I think that late in the game, I'd rather have a 15/18 that can move as opposed to the, I believe it is a 16/20 that cannot move in the Nexus Pilot. And in fact, Nexus Pilot, because it has to go in the middle lane, good opponents will often play around Nexus Pilot. It's definitely not a bad card. I like Nexus Pilot, but I tend to like it in a bit more aggressive decks, and I think Warcharger is potentially a game-winning card late game. So I'm going to grab a Warcharger. Technosmith. I think I would very much like to have a Technosmith in this deck. Again, because I have a small number of strong late-game cards and a number of cards that are solid all-around creatures at all levels. Technosmith helps me have more big bodies than my opponent mid to late game, and I think I'm happy to take that. Banshee is also good in this deck. If you haven't seen the new Banshee that just was released with the last patch, Banshee is a useful way to trigger a Charnel Titan or to get some value out of your Gloom Witch. But the pick here for me is Technosmith. Oh, and I can't believe that a Forge Plate Sentry is available this late in the pack. Second Forge Plate Sentry really makes this deck. Gives me 2 Forge Plate Sentries, an Ionic Warcharger, and a Scrapforge Titan is 4 beefy robots late game. Very happy to see that. and we're going to end with the Morrowfiend, which is just a great blocker mid game for